So, gerade frisch montiert. So, neue Reifen, Kenda Pinner, wo ist das Ventil? Aaron Gwin hat mitentwickelt. Wir haben uns mit ihm unterhalten, wie Stollenprofil, wie das entwickelt wurde, wo die sein sollen, wie die aufeinander abgestimmt sind und so weiter. Aber am besten kann euch das der Aaron natürlich selber erzählen. Viel Spaß! Sitzt.
Hey Aaron, thank you for taking the time to talk about your new signature tire from Kenda.
I think for starters, I don't know if we're going to call it my signature tire yet, but I definitely had a lot of influence. When I signed on with Kenda, they basically already had this tire in the works. So they sent me the drawings for it. And I think they might even have had a plastic mold that was already made. So they basically sent me like, hey, here's what we're kind of wanting to do. What do you think? And so I kind of tweaked on what they had a little bit and changed some things around. So to answer your question though, I mean, having a tire that is sort of your design, I mean, is kind of the ultimate scenario. It's, I think I've ridden almost every brand of tire out there and every model of tire out there. And I mean, we still do. I've ridden all the latest tires from every brand. We ride them on the local trails here. We kind of are always testing and messing around with stuff just to kind of see what everybody else is doing. So for me to be able to just take kind of the combination of all the things that I've liked the best over the years about certain tires, and kind of try to combine them into one tire is, like I say, it's best case scenario when you have the opportunity to do that. So it's definitely good.
As a customer, you maybe have a couple of compounds you can actually choose from, but if you develop a tire, you have like hundreds, I don't know. And how do you work your way through testing all these different possibilities?
For sure. It is tricky because sometimes, we'll have 4 or 5 different versions of the same tire to test in a day. And there's so many variables when you test tires. You could go to one track, which, will expose certain weaknesses and strengths in a tire. And then you could go to another track, I mean, for us, literally just right down the road with a little bit different conditions, and the tires are going to feel quite a bit different. So I think for us, thankfully I've got a lot of experience, so I can fill in a lot of those gaps. So we don't narrow in too much on one specific type of track. I kind of know in my mind, okay, overall, across all the tracks that I ride, which have all the different type of soil conditions you can pretty much think of, this overall compound casing and tread pattern is going to work, what I believe to be the best overall. So, that's always in my mind with a lot of the testing we do, but for sure it can be tricky, like when you have a lot of compounds and a lot of, different things. I think for this tire, we didn't mess with the compounds too much. Kenda already has a good compound and a good casing. So we were really just focusing on the tread pattern of the tire. And then since then we've messed with compounds and we're kind of looking that way towards the future, but we're happy with what we had with the compound. So it was just basically doing tread pattern. And for that, I got a pretty unique opportunity. Usually with most brands, or limited resources, you have to pick a tread pattern, and then you got to it's a lot of money to make a mold and to go down that process, especially for some companies that don't do a lot of it themselves. And so you have to kind of, you basically go from a drawing on a computer to a plastic prototype, which I could show you. I have one here, but I'd have to go get it. And then you go from that, and you look at it. It's the same dimensions as what a regular tire would be, but it's just a section that's about this big. And you go, okay, let's spend a bunch of money and go for it. Don't mess it up. And so it's a big commitment early on. But with Kenda, I had a unique opportunity where we had this new Pinner tire, and we had the tread pattern. I made some tweaks to it to try to improve the braking performance and a few little things from what they had, pretty minor stuff. And then we got the opportunity to basically, I've always liked when the side knobs are more in line with the center knobs and they're not staggered like most tires. To me, the tires I've ridden in the past with that just have a more consistent, predictable feel in hard pack conditions, which is what this tire is mainly designed for. But I've never been able to test like, one tire with side knobs aligned and another tire that's the exact same with the side knobs staggered. And so with Kenda, it was like, okay, you've got this theory and it's what you feel, but how about we test it and we kind of prove it and make sure that it's really what you want. So they basically made 2 molds early on in the prototyping process, and did just that. We had one with the staggered knobs and one where the knobs were in line. And I got to test the exact same tire back to back over a lot of different tracks with just that one change. So it was pretty cool. And we decided on basically what I originally liked, which was the knobs more in a line. I like that consistent feel. I noticed that there's a more predictable point when the tire starts to slide. It's easier for me to feel. It doesn't just kind of break away so randomly. So yeah, that was basically our process with this tire. Was more about the tread pattern than the casing and the compound.
And some companies actually offer maybe about 10 different casings for one profile of a tire, and maybe all the way from downhill to trail riding. Is this something you want to look into on your profile?
I think if you're covering so many varieties or disciplines of riding, cross country to downhill, obviously there's going to be a lot of differences. From my opinion, when it comes to just a downhill tire or a trail tire, 1 or 2 options is plenty for me. I'm not going back and forth between tons of options when I'm riding. Like I find the one that works, and that's basically what we run. So I think, and trying to like nail that compound and casing, so that you have one that's really well rounded. I think a lot of times some of these tires, like the ones you mentioned, they've been around for a long time and things have changed, over the years. So they're changing the compounds or changing the casings to kind of, modernize the tire. And if they're not getting rid of the older ones, because a lot of people like those, then it's, it can build into a pretty large line over time. But for us, I think we've just kind of found what works, and we're definitely tweaking on what we have now. We got plans in the future to maybe mess with the compounds, and we got some technology and some things that we're kind of exploring that I think can be an improvement in the future. But for now, I feel like we have a very unique sort of setup with Kenda, with the way that we lay the rubber over another layer, which is basically an aramid weave or something like Kevlar, I guess people would be more familiar with. So basically with our tires, what that gives us is a lighter tire and a stronger tire, which is pretty difficult to come by, and I think probably kind of be the future for a lot of brands. So we have that with our tires, and I can explain that a little more if you want, but that's basically where we're at. We've been pretty happy with it. So we're just we're working on tread patterns for the most part.
In a World Cup season, your overall race run time maybe is about 20 something minutes, and it all needs to fall into place, and we still see tires fail. What are you actually doing to avoid such a failure?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think we run those flat tire defender systems, and we have a new one that just came out. Those have been a game changer for me. I've run those for the last probably 5 years. We were running them for, I think, almost 2 years before the public even really knew about it. And that's been really helpful, more so on rims, I would say, than tires, just to kind of protect your rims and the overall feel of the bike with, the extra cushioning that those systems provide. But when it comes to tires, I will say that the Kenda tires have any tire can rip and have issues, but I've had far less with Kendas than a lot of the other brands. As far as ripping, and I think that's because of that casing that I was talking to you about. We basically have one layer of rubber, and then we have this aramid weave that's like this very durable layer, and it's pretty hard. So I don't get the sidewall cuts and the knob cuts that I used to on other tires. And it reminded me of it this year because with Intense, I started running that prototype staggered wheel size bike for the last couple of races. and we didn't have a hard pack tire at Kenda that was a 275 tire. We only had the Hellcat, which is good in intermediate, but not so good in certain hard pack conditions. So I was running, you know, these other brands of tires at the last couple of races in the rear, and I was cutting tires again like crazy. And I was like, man, like I kind of forgot how frustrating that could be. And especially for a consumer, the same thing. You buy a brand new $80 tire and you cut it the first run, and there's a sidewall cut and the tire is completely useless, but the knobs are fine. It's like, it's pretty frustrating. So I think the casing that we have with Kenda, that has definitely helped me out as far as the durability of the tires. I mean, obviously you can still rip a tire, but I find that it happens a lot less with ours.
Talking about rims, should the industry maybe take a more integrated approach to a system of a wheel set? Like, okay, we have like the rim, we have the tire, the spokes, everything is like developed to function 100% together, like in the best possible way.
It depends, really. I mean, you could pick it apart forever, I guess, and you could test every single detail. I don't, to be honest. Like we have our tires. I have my rims from E13. We've been running, you know, similar ones for a while now with a little different construction. I think our rim width is 30 millimeter. I could be wrong. I'm pretty bad with numbers when it comes to parts, but and I like you said, I think that's basically your standard. That you might be off by a little here or there, and your tires might be off a little bit here or there, but I've basically found that you can adjust pressures and adjust different things to kind of make up for it. So unless you have something that's way off, I think you're going to generally get a pretty similar feel. So I wouldn't say it's like absolutely important, but you know, I think there is a point where tires definitely behave differently on different rims or different widths of tires and stuff. So, but if you stay in the ballpark, you know, generally, I think you get a pretty consistent feel.
With all these testing, how long it actually takes to hit the market? I mean, for the first idea of the tire to the tire hanging on the shelf in the shop.
I wish it was less, but it depends. And every brand is different. In my experience, it depends on what their resources are. You know, some brands actually make their own tires in-house, and they have access to the molds and all that stuff. And then other brands, their tires are made at some of the places where the big brands of tires are. So you get to get in line basically with everybody else, and they have priority on their tires. And I've been on that end of the spectrum, and it's been pretty frustrating sometimes in the past. With Kenda, we basically make a lot of our own stuff, I think, or all of our own stuff. So we can do things a lot quicker. So the turnaround for us, I mean, it really depends. There's so many variables where in theory you always have a timeline. But there's holidays that come in. There's like, yeah, when you're working with timelines, especially, you know, overseas, it can be all over the place. But I would say generally, I mean, 6 months is probably a pretty safe bet from when you start a tire to where you have it, you know, ready for the public. For us, creating a mold and getting a tire can take, I'm trying to remember because it's been a little while now, but I think it's usually a couple of months. And then you get a certain amount of prototypes and you test. And then if you have to tweak or anything, there are certain things you can tweak to the mold once it's done, and there's certain things you can't. Obviously that's worst case scenario. You don't want to be really messing with a mold after it's already done, but you can if you have to. So there's a bit of a process there potentially, which thankfully we haven't had to do. And then, you know, you go into mass production and all this stuff. So I would say overall, you're usually 6 to 8 months, you know, on the short side.
As you mentioned, the Pinner is more for dry conditions, hard pack. The Kenda has the Grandmother for sticky situations. Will you extend your influence on different set of tires, different profiles?
Yeah, for sure. We're working on kind of just rounding out the range. Like you say, we have the Grandmother, which is, if you guys haven't ridden it, it's the best mud tire I've ever ridden. Like, that thing is good. We made some really good progress on that. And I think it kind of flew a little bit under the radar as far as when we released it. And I wasn't racing a lot this year. We didn't have as many mud races, so it wasn't out there as much. But that tire has been really good. And then we have the Pinner, which is kind of your standard just really good all around, kind of hard pack to intermediate type of tire. But I definitely want another one in the range. I mean, we kind of need that intermediate type of tire that is a little bit of a, got a little more bite, a little more braking. So we're working on something and it should, coming out maybe in a few months, people will start seeing it. So, yeah, I mean, for me, some brands have a lot of tires and stuff. I think for me, there's really only 3 different types of tires that I ride, on all my trails and all the World Cups, that can get you through a season. And really you can do it on 2, but 3 is kind of ideal. So we're working on some other stuff right now that'll be pretty interesting.
What would you recommend riders out there for if the conditions changes, like from dry to damp? Should they go and swap tires, or should just deal with the old tires and their behavior, or just adapt to a different pattern?
I think both are good or can be good. And I think a lot of it depends on the rider, what you're comfortable with, what you're used to, how quickly you can adapt. I mean, everybody's different, and you'll find that at a World Cup level, not just, a lower riding level. There's guys on the World Cup that basically will run the same tire all the time, no matter what, dry, wet, whatever. They're pretty much always on the same tire. And then there's some guys that change tires a lot. I would say I usually run more of the same tire. Like I said, like a lot of times I've either run a dry tire or a wet tire. Like in my mind, there's just been the 2. And if there's a third option, maybe you'll throw one on the rear if you have a faster rolling track, or you have a track where you want a little more braking. But I usually am pretty limited in what I ride, just because I find what I like and I get used to it. And then, I can kind of make it work. With wherever I've ridden dry tires and really wet race runs. And it depends on the type of, wet too. If it's really boggy and soft and muddy, you're going to definitely want a mud tire. But if it's raining really hard, a lot of times you can actually get away with a dry tire because the mud hasn't thickened up yet. So, any of the possibilities are there.
On your current race bike, you have mixed wheel set, means mullet setup. The pinner is still on the front and in the rear. Of course, the tinier diameter has less knobs, but is there more to actually make the tinier diameter and the profile work for the different diameters?
Yeah, for sure. You have to make sure your knob spacing and everything remains consistent. If you go to a bigger tire, you've got to obviously increase the amount of knobs, and you've got to make some tweaks to make sure that your spacing basically stays the same. I wouldn't say that there's a difference, like you want a 275 tire to be spaced different than a 29 tire. I think when it comes to widths and front and rear, there are some things you can play around with on certain types of tracks where, I don't think you need maybe quite as wide of a tire once you go to 2.9, because you've got more contact on the ground anyways. So I don't know. I mean, you can play with widths, and like I said, so much of it is very objective, like depending on, who's riding the tire and what their preferences are. But for me, I basically will run like a 2.4 width tire that's set up almost, it's pretty much identical, the 275 versus the 2.9. And that's the thing that I notice, and what I am pretty heavily involved in is I might, like with Kenda, we already had this pinner design. Basically, it was done before I even signed on. So we tweaked it and we messed with the side knobs. I changed all that up a little bit. But a lot of it is your spacing and your knob height and your knob angle and where your shoulder knobs sit on the side of the tire. Like some tires, when you look at them, the shoulder knobs will kind of sit this way. Some sit a little flatter. Some tires have a pretty round profile. Some are more flat on the top. And all those little things influence the behavior of the tire a lot. You can have a really dialed tread pattern, but maybe not have the tire profile that is right. And it'll be way off. And we were actually riding a competitor tire a couple of weeks ago on a bike that we were testing. And it looked like a great tire to me as far as the tread pattern goes. And it is pretty good. It's similar to a lot of the other stuff we ride, but the radius of the tire was quite a bit different. And it was really bad. I was surprised, like basically how slippery it was, just because they didn't get that part right. And we've experienced that with our testing. If you don't, at least for me, if you don't nail all those dimensions quite right, you can be really, really close to something good and end up pretty far away still. So with our new tire as well, I don't think I touched on it, but with the casing on the Pinner, the casing is actually a bit wider than a lot of tires, and it's a little bit bigger. So it's a 2.4 tire, and we will come out with a bigger one eventually in a couple of months, a wider one. But this first one is basically the one I ride all the time. It's a 2.4. It's maybe a little on the narrower side of a 2.4, kind of, but the casing is basically spot on. So what it allowed us to do is kind of get a tire. For me, if a tire pattern gets too big, the contact patch, the tire can start to feel a bit vague. It doesn't quite have the bite if you get too wide of a tire. It feels good in a straight line and it dampens the bumps good, but it doesn't have the bite on the side. So I don't like to get too wide on the tread pattern, but if you get too narrow on the tire overall, you'll end up getting a really harsh feeling tire basically. So we kind of made the casing of the tire a little bit wider while maintaining a little bit narrower of a contact patch. So you get a more damped feel, but you also get that bite with the side knob. So I could go on and talk about this for a while. There's all kinds of options you can do that, and it's endless. So when a brand comes to you and says, okay, what do you want? It's like, there's a lot of options. So you try to narrow it down. And for me, I think just find the best overall fit for all the terrain and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a well-rounded tire.
This is pretty interesting. Some companies out there, bike companies, they put on wider tires, but to keep the weight down low, they go for a lighter casing. And but you still have all these grippy knobs out there, but this will actually make the tire feel weird? Yeah,
it depends. I think like I said, the tire profile, how round or square it is definitely important. And different conditions, that changes from a mud tire to a hard pack tire, kind of what you want that top of the profile to be of the tire. So, there's just a lot of variables there. And there's also, it depends, your pressures can vary that a lot. Some tires I've found you have to run more pressure and some you run less. Like with Kenda, because we have that kind of special casing, I actually run less pressure on Kenda than I have on every other tire that I've ridden the last probably 7 years, just because it has more sidewall support. So I can run a little bit less pressure and I'm still not hitting rim or rolling the tire in the corners. So I think that's where our advantage is. With this tire, we've got a really great kind of tread pattern, but with the casing, for me, I've been able to run less pressure. It's more durable, and I think it's around 50 to 70 grams lighter per tire over, the competition. So, we've just tried to make gains in all those little areas. But yeah, there's a lot of variables when you're designing, so it's tricky. And I think everybody that's ridden tires knows that. If you ride one tire versus the other, you usually like certain things and you don't like certain things. So we just try to take all the things we like and put it together.
Hopefully we will see you soon on these tires racing the World Cups, because we're sitting here being all bored.
Yeah, me too. Ready to get back to it.
So what are you doing actually right now? Your Instagram shows you're still training. Is it all about staying locked and loaded until like the World Cup finally kicking off?
Yeah, it was a little tricky for the first few weeks because they canceled the first World Cup and then the rest of them were still on the schedule. So it was like, okay, we've just got another month basically. So, with my training, I was coming in really strong for that first race, and I didn't necessarily want to just maintain where I was for, a long period of time. But if it was one more month, it was like, okay, the body is good. Like, we'll just keep pushing for another month, basically. Like I kind of took 1 week, a little bit chill, to sort of like let myself rest and heal a little bit. And then, which is what I would have done after the World Cup. And then just kind of got back on it. But within another week or two, they canceled the next few. And then I was like, all right, now we're a few months out. Now they've canceled more and we have the big break. So now it looks like we might not race a World Cup until maybe the beginning of September, or end of August. But so, yeah, now we've got 4 months, I think. So I've definitely got, I'm hoping some more local races and national championships and nationals before then that I'll be able to do. But yeah, we've kind of just fully regrouped now since we have 4 months. Like I'm just starting a whole nother build, and I have a really good base on me right now. So we're just kind of maintaining and then just putting together like what we want the next 4 months to look like with the change of schedule. So it's been tricky, but yeah, I mean, it's all good. We adapt and figure it out. Especially this year, because the first World Cup was earlier in the season than normal. So I was, we were really hustling like in January. Like we had a new bike, we had, my training, everything was kind of pushed forward a month or month and a half this year. So we were really busy from like January to March. And even before that, from October, we've been busy, but especially from January. And you're building up, you're spending all this time, you're making sure every detail is dialed, you're training really hard. And then, I was in the gym, I think on a Tuesday, and we were supposed to fly out to Portugal 5 days later, and I had finished my workout, and I got a text, I think from a buddy of mine or maybe our team manager, and was like, hey, Portugal's been canceled. And it was like, man, like you're just kind of sitting there ready to go. Like I'm supposed to fly out in 5 days, and now, we're done. So it's a different situation, but I'd say for us, it's been okay.
Jeff made another aluminum prototype for you. I guess you're pretty stoked to actually get it to the races.
Yeah, for sure. It's been pretty fun. The bike's been great. We've been working on it a little bit since last year. I jumped on kind of an early version of it for the last few races last year. The geometry was a bit off and the sizing and a few things, but I really wanted to get a head start for this year. To get it to some real tracks and just see if like the staggered wheel sizes was something I wanted to kind of keep pursuing. And I'm really thankful I did. We learned a lot from those 2 races. So we got home and we basically went to work on a full prototype, because for those races, I just had a prototype rear end on a stock front frame. And there's kind of only so much you can do there to like get things kind of in the ballpark of where you want to be. So this new bike is basically just a custom built staggered wheel size bike. It's basically the same as an M29. We've just adjusted the leverage ratio and a few things a little bit, and then adjusted the geometry to be the same, even though you have a staggered wheel size bike. So I think when people started running the staggered wheels, I think a lot of people just thought like, oh, we've got to, you can just chuck a rear wheel on the back and lower the forks and call it good. But you've definitely got to get the rest of the geometry right.
Thank you for all the insights. Yeah, I think it's covering it all up. Now we have time to eat some more chocolate until we get to ride our bikes again.
Yeah, I know we got a busy day today. I got John, my mechanic's going to stop by pretty soon. He's actually dropping off some of the Pinner tires, and I got to shoot a little video for the launch that we're going to do in a couple of days. So we're going to grab those, and then I got a couple more meetings and some training, and then probably a bike ride. So pretty average day, which is kind of my favorite days.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can test those soon. And for setup and for the exact PSI, I come back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, just let me know. I got you.
Thank you.